I drove up the narrow mountain road, my truck's engine straining against the steep incline as each turn revealed more of the familiar Appalachian landscape. The trees crowded close to the pavement, their branches reaching overhead like old friends trying to wave me down. Buddy sat in the passenger seat, his golden fur catching the late afternoon sunlight that filtered through the windshield. His tongue lolled out as he panted, nose pressed against the glass, watching the world go by with the pure joy only dogs seem capable of. "Almost there, boy," I said, reaching over to scratch behind his ear. 4 days had passed since the phone call about Grandpa. Heart failure, they said. Found him on the porch of the cabin, sitting in his favorite chair like he just decided to take a nap and never woke up. I'd spent those 4 days in a fog of disbelief, arrangements, and now this drive back to a place I hadn't visited in nearly 5 years. The road narrowed further as it wound higher into the mountains of West Virginia. These weren't the jagged peaks of the Rockies or the picturesque summits you'd find on postcards. The Appalachians were older, worn down by time, blanketed in thick forests that concealed their secrets in shadow and silence. My grandfather used to say these mountains had a memory longer than any human could comprehend. The gravel driveway appeared suddenly between 2 large oak trees marked only by a weathered wooden sign with "Walker" burned into it. I turned onto it, the truck bouncing over ruts and stones as we made our way toward the cabin. Buddy perked up, recognizing where we were even after so many years. The cabin came into view as we rounded the final bend, a solid 2-story structure built from local timber nearly 100 years ago by my great-grandfather. The dark wood exterior had aged to a silvery gray in places, and the stone chimney rose from the sloped roof like a sentinel. It wasn't large or fancy, but it was sturdy, built to withstand both the harsh mountain winters and whatever else these woods might throw at it. I parked next to the covered wood pile and sat for a moment, hands still on the wheel. The last time I'd been here, Grandpa had stood on that porch, waving goodbye with one hand, while the other rested on Grandma's shoulder. Now they were both gone. Buddy whined softly and pawed at my arm. "Yeah, I know. Let's go check it out." The moment I opened my door, Buddy scrambled across the seat and jumped out past me, immediately racing around the yard to reacquaint himself with old smells. I grabbed my duffel bag from the back seat and climbed the 3 wooden steps to the porch. The key was where it had always been, hidden in a small metal box affixed to the underside of the porch railing. The door creaked open, releasing the distinctive smell of the cabin: wood smoke, old books, and a faint hint of pine. I stood in the doorway, letting memories wash over me. To my right was the living room with its stone fireplace and worn leather furniture. To the left, the kitchen with the round oak table where I'd eaten countless meals. Straight ahead, a hallway led to 2 bedrooms and a bathroom, with steep stairs climbing to 2 more bedrooms upstairs. Everything looked exactly as I remembered, as if time had frozen since my last visit. The only difference was the absence of my grandfather's presence. I whistled for Buddy, who bounded up the steps and trotted inside, his nails clicking on the wooden floor as he explored the cabin. His tail wagged as he moved from room to room, remembering the layout. I carried my bag to the downstairs bedroom that had always been mine when visiting. A small room with a twin bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out into the woods behind the cabin. I tossed the duffel onto the quilt-covered bed and returned to the truck to unload the rest of my things. It took several trips to bring in all my supplies. Enough food and necessities to last a couple of weeks while I sorted through Grandpa's belongings and figured out what I was going to do with the cabin. The lawyer had explained that according to the will, the property was now mine, the 4th generation of Walkers to own this particular piece of mountain. As I put away groceries in the kitchen, my eyes kept drifting to the window above the sink. Beyond the glass was the beginning of a hiking trail that wound its way deeper into the forest. That trail had been both a source of adventure and warnings throughout my childhood. Grandpa's rules came back to me as I stared into the darkening woods. 6 simple rules he'd drilled into me since I was old enough to venture outside alone. Rules that most people would dismiss as the superstitions of an old mountain man, but I knew better. I'd seen enough during my summers here to know that whatever lived in these mountains wasn't entirely natural. Rule 1. Always trust your dog. If Buddy got spooked, there was a reason. Rule 2. Never respond if your name is called from the woods. Rule 3. Do not acknowledge shapeshifters, especially when they take the form of loved ones. Rule 4. Be inside before dark. Rule 5. Never stop driving if something crosses your path. Rule 6. Never invite strangers inside. Simple rules. Survival rules. Rules I hadn't needed to think about since moving away to college and then settling in the city. But now, as the owner of this cabin and this land, they felt important again. I finished unpacking, then heated up a can of soup for dinner. Buddy ate his kibble noisily from his bowl in the corner. The cabin grew darker as the sun dipped below the mountain ridge, and I moved around, turning on lamps, chasing the shadows into the corners. We broke Rule 4 already, I told Buddy as I checked my watch. It was nearly 8, and full darkness had settled outside. But I guess that's okay since we're inside now. After dinner, I made a pot of coffee and settled at the kitchen table with the folder of legal documents the lawyer had given me, property deeds, tax information, and the details of Grandpa's modest savings that had also been left to me. I was midway through reading the property boundaries when Buddy's behavior changed. He had been sleeping under the table, his head resting on my foot, when suddenly he stiffened. His head came up, ears forward, body completely alert. I wouldn't have noticed except for the way his weight lifted off my shoe. "What is it, boy?" I asked. He rose slowly to his feet, his gaze fixed on the back door that led onto a small mud porch and out toward the trail. A low growl rumbled from deep in his chest. Not the playful growl of tug-of-war, but a sound of warning I'd rarely heard him make. The hairs on my arms stood up as I remembered Rule 1. Buddy's growl deepened as he took a step toward the door, then abruptly stopped. His hackles rose along his spine, his ears pinned back, and his tail tucked between his legs. I got up from the table and moved to the window beside the door. Outside was nothing but darkness. The small yard behind the cabin disappeared into the wall of trees that marked the forest's edge. I couldn't see anything unusual, but Buddy's growling intensified. "What do you see?" I whispered, more to myself than to him. I reached for the switch that turned on the exterior light, but when I flipped it, nothing happened. The bulb must have burned out since Grandpa's death. Buddy backed away from the door now, still growling, still staring at it as if he could see through the solid wood. His retreat was so unlike him that it sent a chill down my spine. Buddy wasn't easily frightened. He'd faced down aggressive dogs twice his size without backing up an inch. Whatever was out there was scaring him badly. I grabbed the heavy Maglite flashlight from the drawer next to the sink and checked that the door was locked. The deadbolt was secure, but I tested the knob anyway, making sure it wouldn't turn. The door to the mud porch was solid oak, installed by my grandfather decades ago, specifically because, as he put it, regular doors don't keep everything out. Buddy retreated further, backing up until he was pressed against my legs, his body trembling slightly, but his growl unwavering. I put my hand on his head, feeling the vibration of his warning through my palm. "It's okay," I told him softly. "We're inside. We're safe." I aimed the flashlight through the window, sweeping its beam across the yard. The light caught nothing but empty space and the trunks of trees at the forest edge. No glowing eyes, no movement. Nothing to explain Buddy's reaction. But I trusted him. Rule 1. I turned off the kitchen lights so I could see better outside, then pulled a chair up to the window. If something was out there, I wanted to know what it was. Buddy stayed pressed against my legs, his growling quieter now but still constant. We sat like that for 20 minutes, me watching the darkness and Buddy watching the door. Occasionally, I'd sweep the flashlight beam across the yard again, but never saw anything unusual. No movement, no sounds beyond the normal chorus of night insects and the distant hoot of an owl. Then, as suddenly as it had started, Buddy's growling stopped. His body relaxed, the hair on his back smoothed down, and he let out a long breath that sounded almost like a sigh. "Is it gone?" I asked him. He looked up at me, then walked back to his food bowl and took a drink of water. His demeanor completely returned to normal. Whatever had been out there had left. I turned the kitchen lights back on and returned to the table, but I couldn't focus on the legal documents anymore. My mind kept replaying Buddy's reaction, trying to make sense of it. In all our years together, I'd never seen him act quite like that. "The mountains are testing us already," I said to Buddy, who had settled back under the table. "First night back and something comes to check us out." He thumped his tail against the floor once, as if agreeing. I sipped my now cold coffee, looking around the kitchen that had been the heart of this home for generations of my family. The familiar space felt different now, not just because Grandpa was gone, but because I was seeing it through new eyes. The eyes of an owner, not just a visitor, someone responsible for maintaining not just the property but the traditions and knowledge that came with it. The Walker family had lived on this mountain for over 100 years. We'd coexisted with whatever else called these woods home, following rules that kept the peace. Now it was my turn to be the keeper of those rules, to respect the boundaries that kept everyone safe. I finished my coffee and locked up the house for the night, checking each window and door twice. In the bedroom, Buddy jumped up onto the foot of the bed, something Grandpa would never have allowed, and settled into a tight circle. As I lay in the darkness, listening to the unfamiliar creaks and groans of the old cabin, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. Not just by whatever had been outside earlier, but by the mountain itself, assessing whether this new walker would honor the old ways. I fell asleep wondering what else would come to test us before the week was through. I woke to sunlight streaming through the bedroom window and Buddy's warm weight against my legs. For a moment, the familiar smell of the cabin and the soft creaking of the old house made me think I was 12 again, here for summer vacation. Then reality crashed back. Grandpa was gone and this place was mine now. Buddy raised his head and yawned, his tail thumping against the quilt when he saw I was awake. I reached out to scratch behind his ears. "Morning, boy. Sleep okay?" After our strange experience last night, I half expected to feel unsettled in the light of day, but the cabin seemed peaceful now. Birds chirped outside and a gentle breeze rustled the trees. The mountain appeared calm, almost welcoming. I got up and pulled on jeans and a flannel shirt, then padded to the kitchen in my socks. The coffee maker was ancient, probably the same one Grandpa had used for 20 years, but it still worked. While it brewed, I looked out the window at the trail behind the cabin. The path wound its way between tall pines and oaks, disappearing into the thick forest that covered most of the mountain. How many times had I walked that trail as a kid? Hundreds, probably. Grandpa and I had hiked it nearly every morning during my summer visits, checking his fishing lines in the creek 2 miles in. "What do you think, Buddy? Feel like a hike?" At the word hike, his ears perked up and his tail wagged faster. I laughed and poured coffee into a travel mug. "Let me get some breakfast first, then we'll go." After a quick meal of toast and eggs, I laced up my hiking boots and grabbed a small backpack. I packed water bottles, a few protein bars, my phone, though service was spotty at best up here, and the Maglite flashlight from last night. The mountain seemed friendly now, but I'd grown up with enough of Grandpa's stories to know how quickly that could change. The morning air felt crisp and cool as we stepped outside. Dew sparkled on the grass and mist still clung to the distant ridges. Buddy ran ahead to the start of the trail, then looked back at me expectantly. "Coming, coming," I called, adjusting my backpack straps. The trail started as a well-worn path about 3 feet wide, with occasional stone steps built into the steeper sections. Grandpa had maintained it meticulously for decades. I wondered if that job fell to me now. Buddy trotted ahead, stopping occasionally to sniff at interesting spots or chase after a squirrel. His behavior was normal, excited but relaxed, nothing like his tense alertness from the night before. Whatever had spooked him seemed gone now. The forest embraced us as we walked deeper, the canopy overhead filtering sunlight into dappled patterns on the ground. Fallen leaves and pine needles cushioned our footsteps. The familiar smell of earth and vegetation filled my lungs with each breath. This was the mountain I remembered. Beautiful, peaceful, alive with natural sounds. We'd been walking for about 20 minutes when I first heard it. "Samuel." The voice came from somewhere to my left, off the trail where the trees grew thicker. I stopped, my body tensing automatically. "Samuel, is that you?" It was Grandpa's voice. Exactly his voice. The slight rasp from decades of smoking pipes. The way he stretched the middle of my name like he always did. For a heartbeat, I almost turned toward it. Then I remembered the second rule. Never respond if your name is called from the woods. I kept walking, my pace steady even as my heart rate picked up. Buddy had stopped his happy exploration and now walked closer to my side, occasionally looking toward where the voice had come from. "Samuel! Samuel, come here, boy! I need to show you something!" The voice sounded so normal, so exactly like Grandpa that it made my chest ache. But the rules had been drilled into me since childhood, and I followed them without question. I didn't look toward the voice. I didn't answer. I just kept walking. "Your mother's here too, Samuel. We're just off the path. Come see us." Buddy pressed against my legs now, his body tense. He wasn't growling like last night, but his tail was down and he kept glancing back the way we'd come. He wanted to leave. Rule 1. Always trust your dog. I should turn back. But something stubborn in me wanted to keep going, to show whatever this was that I wouldn't be frightened away from my own property. So I continued forward, though I rested my hand on Buddy's head for reassurance. His or mine, I wasn't sure. "Samuel Walker, don't you ignore your grandfather, boy." The voice had taken on an edge now, a sharpness that Grandpa's voice would get when he was truly angry, which was rare enough that I recognized it instantly. The imitation was perfect, down to the slight tremble of restrained emotion. "Samuel, please, I'm hurt. I fell. I need help." Now it sounded pained, desperate. Buddy whined and pushed harder against me. I picked up my pace slightly, moving with purpose but not running. Running would be acknowledging it, giving it power. The voice followed us, sometimes from the left, sometimes from the right, but always just out of sight among the trees. It cycled through tactics, angry demands, pitiful pleas, casual conversation, as if we were just catching up after my absence. Each approach was perfectly calibrated to what might make me respond, using details and speech patterns only Grandpa would know. "Remember how we used to fish at the Big Bend? The water's perfect there today. Let's go check it, like old times. Samuel James Walker, you turn around right now and help me. You owe me that much. Just wanted to tell you I'm proud of you, boy. Always have been." That last one nearly broke me. I'd never actually heard Grandpa say those words when he was alive. He wasn't one for expressing feelings directly. Hearing it now, even knowing it wasn't really him, made my throat tighten. I swallowed hard and kept walking. The voice followed us for nearly 10 minutes, growing increasingly frustrated and then suddenly shifting to new approaches. Finally, after what felt like an eternity but was probably closer to 10 minutes, it stopped. The forest fell silent except for natural sounds. Birds, the rustling of leaves, Buddy's panting beside me. When it seemed clear the voice was gone, Buddy's demeanor changed. His tail came back up, and he moved ahead of me again, though not as far as before. We continued hiking for another 30 minutes, reaching the creek where Grandpa and I used to fish. I sat on a fallen log while Buddy splashed in the shallow water, cooling off and chasing minnows. The normality of the moment felt surreal after what we'd just experienced. Had I imagined it? No. Buddy's reaction confirmed something had been there, something that bothered him, something that knew exactly how my grandfather spoke and what he might say to get me to respond. We stayed by the creek for a while, enjoying the peacefulness before heading back toward the cabin. The return hike was uneventful. No voices, no sense of being watched. By the time we reached the edge of the yard, I'd almost managed to convince myself the whole thing had been some kind of auditory hallucination brought on by grief and lack of sleep. Buddy ran ahead to the porch while I paused to retie my bootlace. When I straightened up, I noticed he wasn't barking happily or scratching at the door as he normally would. Instead, he stood completely still at the bottom of the porch steps, staring at the cabin. I approached cautiously, scanning the building for anything unusual. Nothing seemed out of place from the outside. The door was closed, the windows intact, but Buddy wouldn't move forward. "What is it, boy?" I asked quietly. He glanced at me, then back at the cabin, his body language communicating clear unease, not the intense fear from last night, but definite concern. I climbed the steps slowly, Buddy finally following but staying behind me. The door was locked as we'd left it. I used the key and pushed it open, listening carefully before stepping inside. Nothing seemed disturbed in the front room. I moved through it toward the kitchen, Buddy still trailing close behind me. At the kitchen doorway, I stopped cold. My grandmother sat at the oak table, her hands folded neatly in front of her. She wore her favorite blue cardigan, the one with wooden buttons that I remembered from childhood. Her silver hair was pulled back in its usual bun, and her kind face lit up with a smile when she saw me. "There you are, Samuel," she said, her voice exactly as I remembered it. "Did you have a nice walk? You always did love that trail." For one disorienting moment, I felt like I'd stepped back in time. But Rebecca Walker had been dead for 3 years. I'd flown back for her funeral, had watched them lower her casket into the ground next to the plots reserved for Grandpa and eventually me. Rule 3. Do not acknowledge shapeshifters, especially when they take the form of loved ones. The thing at the table smiled with my grandmother's smile, the corners of her eyes crinkling exactly the way they used to. She looked so real, so solid, not like a ghost or apparition, like a living, breathing woman sitting at her own kitchen table where she'd sat thousands of times before. "I made some tea," she said, gesturing to the stove where the kettle sat. "Would you like some? You must be thirsty after your hike." Buddy pressed hard against my legs, trembling slightly. He could see her too. This wasn't my imagination, but he wasn't growling or barking, just exhibiting the same unease he'd shown outside. I backed away without speaking, keeping my eyes on the figure but not meeting its gaze directly. I retreated down the hallway to my bedroom, Buddy right with me. I closed the door and leaned against it, heart pounding. What was the protocol here? Grandpa had taught me the rules but hadn't explained what to do if a shapeshifter got inside. Was I supposed to wait it out? Try to make it leave? The logical part of my brain suggested calling someone. The police, a neighbor, anyone. But what would I say? "Hello, there's a perfect copy of my dead grandmother sitting at my kitchen table." I took several deep breaths, trying to calm myself. 5 minutes. I'd wait 5 minutes, then check again. Maybe it would leave if I didn't engage with it. Those were the longest 5 minutes of my life. I sat on the edge of the bed, Buddy beside me, both of us staring at the bedroom door as if expecting it to burst open at any moment. But nothing happened. The cabin was silent. When the time was up, I rose slowly. "Stay," I whispered to Buddy, who seemed perfectly happy to obey. I opened the door carefully and listened. No sounds came from the kitchen. No clinking of teacups, No chair scraping against the floor. No humming like Grandma used to do when she worked in her kitchen. I moved quietly down the hallway and peered around the corner into the kitchen. The room was empty. The chair my grandmother had sat in was pushed neatly under the table. The kettle sat on the stove, cold to the touch when I checked it. There was no teacup, no sign anyone had been there at all. I searched the rest of the cabin, but everything was exactly as we'd left it that morning. All doors and windows remained locked from the inside. There was no way someone could have entered or left without breaking something, and nothing was broken. Buddy followed me through the final check of the house, his earlier tension gone. When I sat heavily on the living room couch, he jumped up beside me, another rule of Grandpa's broken, and rested his head on my lap. "What are we dealing with here, Buddy?" I asked, scratching behind his ears. 2 for 2 on Grandpa's rules in one morning. As if in answer, he licked my hand once, then settled more comfortably against me. His calmness was reassuring. Whatever had been here was gone now, and Buddy didn't seem to think it was coming back immediately. I stared out the window at the mountain rising behind the cabin. These woods had been testing me since the moment I arrived, but why? Was it because Grandpa was gone? Because ownership had changed hands? Or was something else happening that I didn't understand yet? The lawyer had mentioned nothing unusual when transferring the property, but then I hadn't asked about shapeshifters or voices in the woods. Such questions tended to make people look at you sideways. I needed more information. The problem was, the person who knew the most about this mountain and its peculiarities was gone. Grandpa had taught me the rules, but not the reasons behind them or what to do when they were broken. Buddy shifted against me, sighing contentedly in his sleep. At least I had him, my early warning system and companion. As long as he remained calm, I could believe we were safe, at least for the moment. Outside, the mountain stood silent and watchful under the midday sun, revealing nothing of its secrets. After my encounter with whatever had taken my grandmother's form, I spent the rest of the afternoon checking and rechecking the locks on every door and window in the cabin. My mind kept returning to the perfect details it had gotten right. The blue cardigan with wooden buttons, the way she folded her hands on the table, even the slight tilt of her head when she smiled at me. It wasn't just a vague approximation. It was Grandma Rebecca, down to the tiniest mannerism. Buddy seemed to have forgotten all about it. He sprawled on the living room rug, occasionally sighing in his sleep while I paced from room to room. I envied his ability to move on so quickly. My phone showed a single bar of service. Not great, but enough to make a call if I stood in the right spot. I scrolled through my contacts until I found my Uncle William's number. If anyone might have answers about what was happening, it would be him. Uncle Will had stayed closer to the family property than my mother had, visiting regularly even after moving to his place about an hour away. I held the phone up near the kitchen window, watching the signal strength fluctuate. When it steadied at 2 bars, I hit the call button and waited through several rings. "Samuel?" His voice sounded clear despite the weak connection. "Everything all right up there?" "Not exactly," I said, trying to decide how much to reveal. Uncle Will had grown up here. He knew the rules just as well as I did. "I've had some experiences since I arrived. Things Grandpa warned me about." A long pause followed. "What kind of experiences?" "Someone called my name in the woods this morning," used Grandpa's voice. "Knew things only he would know." I took a breath. And when I got back to the cabin, there was something that looked like Grandma sitting at the kitchen table. Another pause, longer this time. I heard him exhale slowly. "Have you followed the rules?" he asked finally. "Yes." Didn't answer the voice, didn't talk to the thing that looked like Grandma. "And Buddy's been warning me when something's not right." "Good." The relief in his voice was obvious. "Listen, Samuel, the mountains have been more active lately, not just around your place, all the old family properties. Thomas mentioned it when I was at his store last week. Thomas. Runs the general store down in the valley. Known our family for generations. He's aware of the situation. I looked out the window at the forest surrounding the cabin. Why now? Why are they suddenly so active? Not sure, Uncle Will said. But it started before your grandfather passed. He mentioned it in our last conversation, said something felt different, like the balance was shifting. I asked, did Grandpa leave any information, notes or journals about this stuff? If he did, they'd be there at the cabin somewhere. He was private about certain things, even with family. Uncle Will paused again. Samuel, just keep following the rules. They've kept walkers safe for generations. I can come up tomorrow if you want, help you look around. I appreciate it, I said, but I think I need to handle this myself for now. We spoke for a few more minutes about practical matters, the condition of the cabin, the legal transfer of the property before saying goodbye. His words stayed with me as I put the phone down. The mountains have been more active lately. Not just my imagination, then. The kitchen clock showed nearly 5. Outside, the sun was already dipping behind the western ridge, shadows stretching longer across the yard. We needed a few supplies, fresh milk, bread, coffee, and I suddenly felt reluctant to spend another night at the cabin without stocking up. Buddy, I called, and he lifted his head from the rug. Want to go for a ride? His tail thumped against the floor at the word ride, and he was on his feet in seconds, trotting to the door. I grabbed my jacket and keys, checking that I had my wallet. Rule 4 was to be inside before dark, but we would only be gone an hour at most. Plenty of time to get to Thomas's store and back before full darkness set in. The air felt cooler as we stepped outside, the wind picking up with the approach of evening. Buddy jumped into the passenger seat of the truck with practiced ease, and I slid behind the wheel, starting the engine. The familiar rumble felt reassuring, solid, real, normal. We backed out of the driveway and headed down the narrow mountain road, the trees forming a tunnel of branches overhead. The road twisted and turned, following the natural contours of the mountainside. I drove slower than necessary, partly because of the winding route and partly because I felt uneasy. Buddy sat alert in his seat, watching the road ahead. The shadows deepened as we descended, though the sky was still light. We'd gone about 3 miles when my headlights caught something in the road ahead. A figure stood directly in our path, illuminated in the beams. As we drew closer, I felt my stomach drop. It was my mother, Jennifer Walker, standing in the middle of the road with her arms waving frantically above her head. I eased off the gas instinctively, the truck slowing. She looked so real. Her dark bob haircut, the light blue sweater she often wore, even the silver bracelet on her wrist that had been a gift from my father years ago. Her face was streaked with tears, her mouth forming words I couldn't hear through the closed windows. "Help me," she seemed to be saying. "Samuel, help me." Buddy gave a low whine beside me, pressing closer to the door and away from the windshield. Rule 5 echoed in my head. Never stop driving if something crosses your path. My mother lived 3 hours away in Charleston. There was no reason for her to be here, alone, on this mountain road. No reason except that something wanted me to stop. I pressed my foot down on the accelerator. The truck picked up speed, heading straight for the figure of my mother. Her eyes widened, her mouth opening in what looked like genuine shock and fear. Her hands pressed against the hood as we approached, then against the windshield. A terrible moment where I could see every detail of her face, inches from mine through the glass. Then we passed through her, and she dissolved like smoke into the air. Buddy barked once, a sharp sound that made me jump, then settled back into his seat, looking considerably more relaxed. My hands were shaking on the steering wheel. I kept driving, maintaining my speed, watching the rearview mirror, half expecting to see her reform behind us. But the road remained empty. The rest of the drive passed without incident. The valley opened up below us, and soon we reached the small cluster of buildings that passed for a town in these parts. Thomas's general store sat at the crossroads, its weathered clapboard exterior lit by a buzzing neon open sign in the window. I parked in front and turned to Buddy. "Stay here. I'll be quick." The store's bell jingled as I pushed the door open. The interior was exactly what you'd expect from a rural general store. A little bit of everything crammed onto shelves that had probably been there since the 1950s. A pot-bellied stove sat in one corner, though it wasn't lit in the mild spring weather. An elderly man stood behind the counter, his lean frame slightly stooped with age. He looked up as I entered, sharp hazel eyes studying me from beneath the brim of a faded baseball cap. "Evening," he said. "You must be Samuel Walker." I nodded, not surprised he knew me. In small communities like this, everyone knew everyone else's business. "Thomas," he said, though he didn't offer his hand. "Known your family going back to your great-grandfather's day." "Uncle Will mentioned you," I said, grabbing a shopping basket and moving toward the dairy cooler. Thomas watched me as I selected milk, bread, and a few other essentials. When I brought them to the counter, he rang them up without saying anything more. His silence made me uncomfortable. "You knew my grandfather well?" I asked as he bagged the items. "Well, as anyone did." Thomas nodded. "Good man. Understood the way things work up here." There was something in his tone that made me think he wasn't just talking about mountain living in general. "I just saw something strange on the road coming down," I said, testing the waters. "Looked like my mother standing in the middle of the road." Thomas's hands paused in their work. His eyes met mine, sharp and evaluating. "But you didn't stop," he said. It wasn't a question. "No, drove right through it." He nodded once, seemingly satisfied, and finished bagging my groceries. "They've been more aggressive this week," he said casually, as if discussing the weather. "Testing folks who come back to old family land, not just your property, all the old places." He pushed the bags toward me. $32.57. I handed him two $20 bills, trying to process what he'd just said so matter-of-factly. As he made change, I pulled out my phone. "Got a signal in here?" I asked. "Best in town," Thomas replied. "Who you calling?" "My mother, just to check." He nodded, understanding immediately. I dialed her number and she picked up on the third ring. "Samuel, everything okay?" The sound of her real voice, slightly worried and very much alive, loosened something in my chest. "Yeah, Mom. Everything's fine. Just checking in. How are you?" "I'm good. Just got home from work." Her voice sounded normal, coming from her home in Charleston, not from a figure dissolving on a mountain road. "How's the cabin?" "It's interesting," I said, aware of Thomas listening. "I'll tell you more later. Just wanted to hear your voice." We chatted briefly before saying goodbye. When I hung up, Thomas was watching me with knowing eyes. "She's fine," I told him, though he hadn't asked. "Course she is," he said, counting out my change. "Real people don't stand in the middle of mountain roads at dusk." I took the money and the bags. "You seem to know a lot about what's happening up there." Thomas leaned on the counter. "Been here all my life. You see things, living in these mountains long enough." His voice lowered slightly. "Your grandfather trusted me. We talked sometimes about the peculiarities of this place." "And what did he say about what's happening now? About things getting more aggressive?" Thomas shook his head. He was concerned last time I saw him. Said the balance was changing, that something was waking up that should stay sleeping. He straightened. "You better head back before full dark. And Samuel," I paused at the door, "keep following those rules of his. He made them for a reason." The bell jingled as I pushed the door open and stepped back into the evening air. Buddy watched me approach through the truck window, his tail wagging when I climbed in. "Mom's fine," I told him, setting the groceries on the floor of the passenger side, and apparently, we're not the only ones dealing with increased activity. Buddy made a soft woof sound that I chose to interpret as agreement. The drive back up the mountain was tense but uneventful. I kept scanning the road ahead, half expecting another apparition to appear, but nothing did. We made it back to the cabin just as the last light was fading from the sky, the tree line a dark silhouette against deep blue. I carried the groceries inside while Buddy did a quick patrol of the yard. The cabin felt different now. Not just a family property I'd inherited, but something more complex. A place with responsibilities I was only beginning to understand. As I put away the milk and bread, I thought about what both Uncle Will and Thomas had said. The mountains were testing me, but why? What was the balance Grandpa had mentioned, and what was waking up that should stay sleeping? Buddy scratched at the back door, and I let him in. He seemed calm enough, so whatever had bothered him last night wasn't present now. I locked the door behind him and checked all the windows again. 3 of Grandpa's rules had been tested in a single day. I wondered which would come next, and whether I'd be ready when it did. I stood in the kitchen putting away the last of the groceries, my mind still churning over what Thomas had said. 3 of Grandpa's rules tested in a single day. What were the odds of that happening by chance? The mountain was clearly evaluating me, seeing if I remembered what I'd been taught. Buddy had settled on the living room rug again, seemingly at ease now that we were safely locked inside. I envied his ability to relax after the strangeness we'd experienced. The image of my mother's face pressed against the windshield kept flashing in my mind. That look of shock and betrayal as I accelerated toward her. Even knowing it wasn't really her, the memory made my stomach turn. I glanced at the clock, just past 8. The darkness outside the windows was complete now, the kind of absolute black you only get miles from city lights. I decided to heat up some soup for a late dinner and then maybe look through some of Grandpa's old papers. If the supernatural elements of this mountain were becoming more active, there might be information somewhere in the cabin that could help me understand why. The microwave hummed as it heated my soup. I leaned against the counter, listening to the quiet sounds of the cabin, the tick of the old wall clock, the occasional creak of settling timber, the soft rhythm of Buddy's breathing from the next room. Despite the day's events, the cabin itself felt like a sanctuary. 4 solid walls and a roof that had sheltered walkers for generations. Just as the microwave beeped, I heard Buddy's nails click against the hardwood as he got to his feet. Not the sudden alert stance from last night, but a casual movement, like he'd heard something mildly interesting. "What is it, boy?" I called, taking the soup out. He wandered into the kitchen, head tilted slightly, ears perked forward. He didn't seem alarmed, just curious. Then I heard it too, the crunch of tires on gravel. I set the soup down and moved to the front window, pulling the curtain back just enough to see out. Headlights cut through the darkness at the end of the driveway, then shut off. I couldn't make out the vehicle in the darkness, but it definitely wasn't my uncle's familiar truck. "Someone's here," I murmured to Buddy, who stood beside me now, still more curious than concerned. This didn't necessarily mean trouble. It could be a neighbor or someone lost on the mountain roads looking for directions. But after everything that had happened, I wasn't taking chances. I grabbed the mag light from the kitchen counter and slipped my boots on, not bothering to lace them. "Come on," I said to Buddy, and he followed me to the front door. I stepped onto the porch, flicking on the flashlight and sweeping its beam toward where I'd seen the headlights. The light caught nothing but trees and empty driveway. No car, no people. Had they parked further down and walked up? Or had I imagined the whole thing? Buddy pushed past me, trotting down the porch steps and into the yard, nose to the ground. He didn't seem worried, which was reassuring. I followed, sweeping the flashlight in wide arcs across the property. "Hello?" I called. "Anyone there?" No response came except for the rustle of wind through the trees and the distant hoot of an owl. I walked to where I thought I'd seen the headlights, Buddy ranging ahead of me, but found no tire tracks. No signs a vehicle had been there at all. I must be losing it, I muttered, turning back toward the cabin. The soup would be getting cold, and standing out in the dark yard suddenly seemed foolish. I whistled for Buddy, who had wandered toward the tree line. He turned and trotted back to me, and together we headed for the cabin. That's when I heard it, the soft sound of footsteps on the wooden porch. My beam caught movement by the front door. A small figure stood there, a young girl, maybe 7 or 8 years old. She wore a white dress that looked dirty and slightly torn at the hem. Her dark hair hung in tangles around a pale face, and her thin arms were wrapped around herself as if for warmth. I stopped at the bottom of the steps, Buddy pressing against my leg. He wasn't growling, but his body had tensed. "Hello there," I said cautiously. "Are you lost?" The girl looked up, startled as if she hadn't heard us approach. In the harsh beam of the flashlight, her face looked tear-streaked and frightened. "Please help me," she said, her voice small and trembling. "My parents' car broke down on the road, and they went to get help. But they didn't come back. I got scared waiting alone." Her story sounded reasonable enough. These mountain roads were treacherous, especially at night. A broken-down car, parents going for help, a frightened child left behind who'd spotted the lights of the nearest house. "How long ago did they leave?" I asked, not moving closer yet. "I don't know," she sniffled. "It felt like hours. I'm really cold." She did look cold, shivering in the night air that had grown chilly after sunset. The thin white dress couldn't be providing much warmth. Part of me wanted to usher her inside immediately, get her warm, call for help. But Buddy still hadn't relaxed beside me, and after today, I wasn't taking anything at face value. "What's your name?" I asked, taking one step up onto the porch, but still keeping my distance. "Emily," she replied, wiping at her eyes with the back of her hand. "Please, can I come inside? Just until my parents come back?" I raised the flashlight a bit higher, illuminating her face more clearly. She blinked in the brightness, looking away momentarily. When she looked back, I caught something, a flash of wrongness in her eyes. I moved the beam directly to her face, ignoring her wince. That's when I saw it clearly. Her eyes were completely black. No iris, no white, just empty darkness that seemed to swallow the flashlight beam. Rule 6 echoed in my head. Never invite strangers inside. I took a step back, nearly stumbling down the porch steps. Buddy gave a low whine beside me. "I need to go inside and call for help," I said, keeping my voice steady with effort. "The police or rescue services can come look for your parents." "No." The girl, Emily, stepped forward, one hand outstretched. "Please don't leave me out here alone. I'm scared. Can I come in while you call? Please?" Her voice was still childlike, pleading, but there was something underneath it now, a note of demand rather than request. "I'm sorry," I said firmly. "Wait here. I'll make the call and bring you a blanket." I backed toward the door, keeping the flashlight trained on her. Buddy stuck close to my side as I fumbled for the doorknob behind me. The girl's face remained pleading, frightened, so at odds with those bottomless black eyes. As soon as I got the door open, I slipped inside with Buddy and shut it firmly, turning the deadbolt. My heart hammered in my chest as I leaned against the solid oak, trying to process what I'd just seen. A knock came almost immediately, light and tentative. "Please," called the girl's voice through the door. "I'm really scared out here." I said nothing, moving to the window beside the door to peek through the curtain. She stood right where I'd left her, small and forlorn in her dirty white dress, looking exactly like a lost child except for those eyes. "I know you're in there," she called. "Please let me in. It's cold out here, and I'm all alone." The pleading continued for several minutes as I stood frozen by the window, watching. Buddy had taken up position at my side, alert but not panicking. Whatever this was, he seemed to view it as a threat to be monitored, rather than immediate danger. I considered my options. I could call for help, but who? The police wouldn't get here for at least 45 minutes, and what would I tell them? That a little girl with black eyes was on my porch? They'd think I was crazy or drunk. Uncle Will was too far away to get here quickly. Thomas might understand, but I didn't have his number. A sudden loud bang on the door made me jump. No longer the gentle knocking of a child's hand, but a violent pounding that shook the frame. "Let me in, Samuel," the voice called. But it wasn't a child's voice anymore. It was deeper, resonant, a perfect imitation of my grandfather's voice. "Let me in, and I'll tell you what really happened to me." I backed away from the door, nearly tripping over Buddy. "Grandpa died of heart failure," I called, immediately regretting breaking my silence. "They found him in his chair on the porch." A dark chuckle came through the door, still in Grandpa's voice. "Is that what they told you? There's so much more to the story, Samuel. So much you don't know. Let me in, and I'll explain everything." The pounding continued, rhythmic and forceful. I retreated to the kitchen, trying to think. This was clearly the next test, the sixth rule being challenged directly. But unlike the tests in the woods or on the road, I couldn't simply drive away or keep walking. This thing was at my door, demanding entry, using my grandfather's voice to try to trick me. "Samuel!" Now it was my mother's voice, frantic and afraid. "Samuel, please! Something's wrong. I need your help. Open the door." I pressed my hands over my ears, but the voice carried clearly through the cabin. "Sam, it's Will." My uncle's voice now, calm and reasonable. "Let me in, nephew. We need to talk about what's happening here." Buddy pushed against my leg, then walked to the hall closet and sat in front of it, looking back at me expectantly. I followed, opening the door to find a metal baseball bat leaning in the corner. Grandpa's, from his younger days. I grabbed it, the weight solid and reassuring in my hands. Armed, I moved back to the living room, staying well away from the door, but able to hear the continued pounding and cycling voices. The thing outside went through every family member I could think of. My mother, my uncle, my grandmother, even my father who had left when I was young. Each voice was perfect, each plea carefully calibrated to what might make me open the door. Samuel James Walker. My grandfather's stern voice again. "You open this door right now, boy. This is still my house, and you will respect me." I sat on the couch, the bat across my knees, and waited. Buddy jumped up beside me, pressing against my side. The pounding and voice continued for what felt like hours, but was probably closer to 1, according to the clock on the mantel. I tried to ignore it, to focus on the solid reality of the cabin around me. Buddy's warm presence, the smooth wood of the bat under my hands. Finally, after cycling through every voice it could think of, the pounding stopped. The sudden silence felt almost as shocking as the noise had been. I sat perfectly still, listening for any sound from the porch. Nothing. 10 minutes passed. Then 20. I didn't move from the couch, and Buddy stayed alert beside me. After 30 minutes of complete silence, I finally stood, bat in hand, and approached the door cautiously. The porch light was still on, illuminating the wooden boards through the small window beside the door. I peered out, expecting to see the girl, or whatever it was, still waiting. The porch was empty. No child in a white dress, no figure at all. Just the empty wooden planks and the darkness beyond. I checked every window in the cabin, making sure nothing was trying to get in elsewhere. All remained secure. Whatever had been testing me appeared to have given up, for now. I returned to the living room and sank back onto the couch, the baseball bat still in my hands. Buddy laid his head on my knee, looking up with eyes that seemed almost understanding. 4 rules tested, I murmured, running my hand over his soft fur. 2 to go. Outside, the mountain waited in silence, watching to see if I would continue to remember what I'd been taught. I must have fallen asleep on the couch. The baseball bat was still clutched in my hands when I opened my eyes, golden light streaming through the front windows. Dawn had arrived. Buddy lay curled against my side, his warm weight a comfort after the long night of knocking and voices that had finally stopped sometime after midnight. My back ached from sleeping in an awkward position, and my fingers felt stiff from gripping the bat all night. I set it aside and stood, stretching to work out the kinks. Buddy raised his head, yawned, and jumped down from the couch. He seemed much calmer this morning, padding to the back door and scratching lightly to be let out. I checked the front door first, half expecting to find damage from the violent pounding, but the solid oak showed no marks, not even a scuff. If I hadn't heard it myself, I might have thought I dreamed the whole thing. After letting Buddy out into the yard, I put coffee on to brew and watched through the kitchen window as he sniffed around the edges of the property. 4 of Grandpa's 6 rules had been tested now. I wondered if the final 2 would come today, or if whatever was testing me might space them out, letting me relax before hitting me with something new. The coffee maker gurgled and hissed as it finished. I poured a cup and took it outside to the back porch, wanting to feel the morning sun on my face after the tense night indoors. The air felt crisp and clean, with that particular mountain freshness you can't find anywhere else. Buddy had wandered toward the tree line, but stayed in sight, investigating something at the base of a large oak. I sat on the porch steps, sipping my coffee and watching him work his way from tree to tree along the edge of the woods. His behavior seemed odd. He'd approach a tree, sniff intently, then back away with his ears flat before moving to the next one. After the 4th tree, he sat down and gave a small whine, looking back at me. Curious, I set my mug down and walked over to him. "What is it, boy?" He whined again, looking at the tree in front of him, then back at me. I followed his gaze to the trunk of an old oak. At first, I didn't see anything unusual, just rough bark and moss. Then I noticed it. A symbol carved into the wood about 4 feet up from the ground. It looked fresh, the exposed inner wood still pale against the weathered bark. The symbol wasn't anything I recognized, not a letter or number from any alphabet I knew. It was angular and complex, almost like a circuit diagram, but with curves that gave it an organic quality. Looking at it made me uneasy in a way I couldn't explain, like trying to read something written in a language I didn't understand, but somehow knew was threatening. I touched it lightly with my fingertips. The carving was shallow but precise, as if made with a small, sharp tool. Buddy whined again, backing away further. "When did this get here?" I murmured, looking around. That's when I noticed similar markings on other trees, at least a dozen that I could see from where I stood, all facing the cabin. How had I missed them yesterday? They weren't subtle. Each symbol about the size of my hand, carved at roughly the same height on each tree. I walked to the next marked tree, Buddy trailing reluctantly behind me. This symbol was different from the first, more angular, with what looked like a central eye or spiral. Again, that strange unease washed over me as I examined it. Not fear exactly, but a deep sense of wrongness, like looking at something that shouldn't exist in our world. Grandpa had never mentioned anything about symbols on the trees. None of his rules covered strange carvings appearing overnight. I made my way from tree to tree, documenting each unique symbol in my mind. Buddy refused to come close to any of them, hanging back and whimpering softly whenever I approached a marked tree. The marks formed a rough circle around the property, like a boundary line drawn through the forest. I followed them until I came to the largest oak on the property, an ancient giant that Grandpa had always said was here long before the first walker built on this land. It had a symbol too, larger and more complex than the others, covering a good portion of its massive trunk. This one made my head hurt to look at. The lines seemed to shift slightly when I wasn't focusing directly on them, like an optical illusion. Buddy stopped about 10 feet away from this tree and sat down firmly, refusing to come closer. He wasn't just uncomfortable now. He was scared. "It's okay," I told him, though I wasn't sure it was. "Stay there." As I studied the complex carving, I noticed something odd about the ground at the base of the tree. The dirt looked recently disturbed, not dug up exactly, but different from the surrounding soil, looser somehow. Kneeling down, I ran my hand over the spot. The earth gave way slightly under my palm, as if something had been buried there not long ago. I looked back at Buddy, who was watching me intently from his safe distance. "What do you think? Should we see what's down there?" He gave a short bark that I chose to interpret as agreement. I went back to the cabin for a garden trowel I'd seen in the mudroom, then returned to the oak. The soil came away easily as I dug, confirming my suspicion that it had been disturbed recently. About 8 inches down, the trowel struck something solid with a dull thunk. Brushing away the remaining dirt, I found a metal box about the size of a hardcover book. It was old, the metal darkened with age and slightly rusted around the edges, but the latch was new, a modern padlock that gleamed in the morning light. Attached to it with a piece of twine was a small key. My hands trembled slightly as I unlocked the box. Whatever was inside had been deliberately buried beneath the most prominently marked tree. Part of me worried it might contain something dangerous or cursed. This whole situation felt like something from a horror movie, but my curiosity won out. The lid creaked as I lifted it. Inside was a leather-bound journal, its cover worn smooth with handling. I recognized it immediately as my grandfather's. He'd always had it with him when I was growing up, jotting down notes about the weather, wildlife sightings, maintenance needed around the property. I'd never been allowed to read it. It was private, he'd said. Just boring old man stuff. I lifted it carefully from the box. A folded piece of paper fell out from between the pages, my name written on it in Grandpa's unmistakable handwriting. I unfolded it with care. "Samuel," it read. "If you're reading this, then I'm gone and you've found the marks. They'll appear when you're being tested. The journal will explain. Remember the rules." The note was dated just 3 days before he died. I sat back on my heels, the journal heavy in my hands. Grandpa had known this would happen. He'd buried this box, written this note, all just days before his death. Had he known that was coming too? Buddy had crept a little closer, still keeping his distance from the marked tree, but watching me intently. I tucked the note in my pocket and opened the journal to its first page. The earliest entry was dated nearly 50 years ago, when Grandpa would have been in his late 20s. "Took ownership of the family property today," it began. Dad explained the responsibility that comes with it. "The mountain has ways of testing new guardians. Already found the first mark on the big oak. We'll begin recording the tests as they come." I flipped forward, scanning entries that detailed everyday life interspersed with accounts of strange experiences. Voices in the woods, apparitions on the road, visitors at the door after dark. Each generation of walkers, it seemed, had faced the same tests I was facing now. About halfway through, I found an entry that made me stop and read more carefully. "William passed all 6 tests this week. The mountain accepts him, though he won't live here full-time as the traditions would prefer. Jennifer refuses to be tested at all, says she wants no part of the mountain superstitions. I worry what this means for the family legacy. The balance must be maintained. My uncle and mother. So, Uncle Will had gone through this too, but my mother had rejected it entirely. That explained why she'd moved away to Charleston, why she rarely visited. It wasn't just a preference for city life. She'd made a deliberate choice to break away from whatever strange inheritance the Walker family carried. I turned more pages, finding detailed accounts of the entities that inhabited the mountain. They weren't evil, according to Grandpa, just different, existing alongside us but separate, like neighbors with very different customs. The rules weren't superstitions, but practical guidelines for coexistence developed over generations. Near the end of the journal, the entries became more urgent, the handwriting less neat. "The balance is shifting," read an entry from just 2 months ago. "The old agreements are being questioned. Some force is pushing from below, testing the boundaries we've maintained for generations. The marks have appeared for the first time since William's test, though there's no new walker taking ownership. Something is changing." I flipped to the final pages, finding an entry dated the day before Grandpa died. "Samuel will inherit the property when I'm gone. The lawyer has the paperwork ready. I've taught the boy the rules, but it's been years. Will he remember? The testing will be more intense for him. I feel it. The mountain needs a strong guardian now more than ever. I've buried this journal where he'll find it if he passes the 4th test. If he's reading this, there's hope." The last entry was on the final page, the ink still looking fresh. The marks are spreading, circling the entire property now. Whatever sleeps deep in the mountain is growing restless. Each walker generation has kept the secret, maintained the balance, ensured that what lies beneath stays dormant. Now it falls to Samuel. The entities aren't trying to harm him. They're testing his worthiness to guard what they also protect. 6 tests, 6 rules. If he passes, the mountain will accept him. If he fails... The entry ended there, unfinished. Whatever Grandpa had meant to write about failure remained unsaid. Had he been interrupted? Had his heart given out before he could complete his thought? Or had he simply not wanted to contemplate what failure might mean? I closed the journal, my mind reeling. The Walker family wasn't just living on this mountain. We were guarding something ancient and powerful that slept beneath the ground. The strange experiences I'd had weren't random supernatural events, but deliberate tests administered by entities that shared our interest in keeping whatever it was dormant. As I sat there processing this revelation, I noticed a change in Buddy's demeanor. He'd stopped whimpering and was now sitting up straight, his tail sweeping slowly across the ground. His eyes were still fixed on the marked tree, but the fear had left them. He looked alert, but calm. A warm breeze rustled through the trees, gentle and natural. The oppressive feeling that had hung over the property since our arrival seemed to lift, like a heavy blanket being pulled away. I took a deep breath, and for the first time since coming back to the cabin, my lungs felt like they could expand fully. I looked around at the trees with their strange symbols. They still made me uneasy to look at directly, but the deep sense of wrongness had diminished. They were just marks now, unusual and foreign, but no longer threatening. Buddy stood up and trotted over to me, pressing his head against my hand. His tail wagged properly now, the tension gone from his body. He looked up at me with clear eyes that seemed almost to say, "We did it." Standing up with the journal clutched in my hand, I surveyed the property, the cabin, the surrounding forest, the mountain rising behind it all. This land had been in my family for generations, passed down from walker to walker along with the responsibility of guardianship. Now it was officially mine, not just legally through inheritance, but recognized by whatever ancient power dwelled here. I had passed the test. I had proven myself worthy of the Walker legacy. Whatever slept beneath the mountain would continue its slumber, guarded by yet another generation of my family. Buddy barked once, a happy sound, and ran toward the cabin. I followed, the journal tucked securely under my arm. There was much more to read, much more to learn about my family's strange responsibility. But for now, the testing period was over. The mountain had accepted me as its new guardian.